Hi everyone. Welcome to today's Torah study. Today is November 21st, 2016. Today's Torah study is going to be about the Not My President, hashtag Not My President movement. So many of you might be aware.
Did you all get something?
Many of you might be aware that there was an election recently in this country for the office of president, and there are some people who are not so thrilled with the results. Yeah, there's such a thing, and there are protests in numerous cities. So I wanted to explore a little bit what the Torah felt about this concept. Now, obviously, the parallels are not going to be 100%. There was no president. There was no democratic elected leader. We spoke about that a while ago. That the Torah, there's a king, etc. But there is a very good comparison in the fact the way the laws were created. Ultimately, laws were created by a majority vote. There was a Supreme Court called the Sanhedrin that sat in the temple in Jerusalem, and when a question of law came about, they took a vote.
Wait a minute. You have to tell us what period you're talking about.
Biblical period from the time of the giving of the Torah, right, to Moses in the desert, until, let's say, the destruction of the temples. There was a Sanhedrin. There was for 1,500 years.
Wait a minute. I can't remember the word Sanhedrin appearing until much later in biblical texts.
Correct. That is correct. The actual word Sanhedrin, which we used to define the group of rabbis at the court. But as we'll see from Deuteronomy, we're starting biblical here. We're going from the Bible until the end till the dispersion in exile, to late Second Temple. There was always a Supreme Court, and that Supreme Court, 70 members, went by majority vote. So we will see that in one hand, the sources all point to one way, and then we get a curveball out of left field from another source, and the tension that those sources bring up are actually, I would say, are very instructive today how we deal with this problem.
So Moses was not the sole lawmaker.
Moses was not a lawmaker. Moses was a transmitter of the law.
Well, he was a transmitter of the law, but he was also.
No, he was not the sole lawmaker, decider. They would come and consider the elders. Right, Moses. There is some sources, without going into it, that Moses was maybe equal, or in stature to all of them put together. But and there are texts that do indicate that. But yeah, but that Moses had complete fiat over laws is not true, and the king for sure didn't.
But that was much later.
The kings and the leaders never did. Okay, so if you open Deuteronomy 17, if a case is too baffling for you to decide, be it homicide, civil law, or assault, matters of dispute in your courts, you shall promptly repair to the place of the Lord that your God will have chosen. That means there were our local courts, and before the Levitical priests, who were or the magistrate in charge at the time, you'll present your problem. When they have announced you the verdict in the case, you shall carry out the verdict that is announced to you from the place that the Lord chose. Here we have an indication, right? There will be a place. It doesn't list Jerusalem, obviously. Observing scrupulously all their instructions. You shall act in accordance with the instructions given to you, and the ruling handed down to you. You must not deviate from the verdict and that they announce to you, either to the right or to the left. So here we have a very clear statement that you have to follow what the court decides, no matter what, whether right or whatever they decide. And then what happens if you decide not to? Should a man act presumptuously and disregard, that man shall die. And you'll sweep out the evil from the Jewish people. And then Rashi, quoting, I tried to limit it to a source that I could find in English. Rashi quoting a medrash, a medrash, a Tanaic medrash, right and left. Even if you are told by this judge that your right is left and your left is right, and even though you have to listen to him. So here you have the first time and the first source that deals with the problem, what if you really believe the court got it wrong? You believe that the supreme deciding factor made a big mistake. And this is the parallel I'd like to talk about. We have a system of laws here set up by the Constitution, and here it went in a way that it ended up being that many people find wrong. Many people find against their core beliefs and values. But again, it went with the rules, and the rules are clear that the majority of states votes, however it works, based on the laws, it went a certain way. But you know it's wrong. So that's the parallel we see here, that if the judges, again, you had a group of judges, you had 70 judges, 36 voted right and 34 voted wrong, in your opinion. But what are those 34 judges to do now? In their opinion, they got it wrong. What should they do? So seemingly the answer is, no matter if they tell you that your right is left, I mean, it's so clear to you that they're wrong, even so you have to follow them, on punishment of death. Now, two Talmudic sources in Sanhedrin, Rabbi Elazar said, even if he, the elder, would say that he has a tradition that he is correct, and the court only counters, we view it as such, he is still executed in order not to create arguments. So the Talmud understands this concept that we find in Deuteronomy, that if you would always have arguing, if you'd always have infighting about laws, that means nothing would ever get settled, then it would end up being, you'd have schisms, you'd have breakaway groups, and that would be not possible. We're one group, we're one nation, we're one people. And there has to be a supreme decider, even if you really believe that they said on the right that's left and left that's right. And our rabbis taught in source 4, a rebellious elder is liable, and Rabbi Simon said, even for a single detail arising out of the subtle interpretations of the rabbis. So here we see, and if you take a look at it, it's pretty clear that whatever the rabbi says goes. Now there's a famous story in the Talmud. Just a little background. The Jewish calendar is based on a lunar calendar. So in ancient times, before for hundreds and I would say thousands of years, the calendar was based on observation. You'd have to have two witnesses observe the new moon, come to the court come to the Sanhedrin in the temple, and announce that they've seen the new moon. And once that is when the new Jewish month started. It wasn't automatic. There was no set calendar. And the holidays, therefore, are based. Like, for example, the famous holiday Yom Kippur is the 10th day of the month of Tishrei. So the month of Tishrei, the first of the month of Tishrei, is decided by when the new moon of Tishrei is observed. That's Rosh Hashanah. 10 days later is Yom Kippur. So on another occasion, two witnesses came and said, we saw it at the proper time. But on the night which should have been the new moon, we didn't see it. And Rabbi Gamliel had already accepted their evidence. Rabbi Dosa ben Hurkana said they are false witnesses, and Rabbi Joshua said, I agree. So here you had two witnesses. Now, right, there was no video cameras, there was not everyone had their cell phones going up into the sky. So we went by two witnesses, whatever they said. So there was two witnesses who said they saw a new moon, which would make, let's say, Tuesday, for argument's sake, Rosh Hashanah. And that which would make, if Tuesday is Rosh Hashanah, the following Thursday would be Yom Kippur. Great. Problem is, Rabbi Gamliel said that is Tuesday, and Rabbi Shua did not accept them as witnesses. They're liars. They're just making it up. And there were always no goodniks who tried to throw a monkey wrench in the works. So what happened was Rabbi Gamliel, who was in charge of the Sanhedrin, in charge of the court, declared Tuesday Rosh Hashanah, the following Thursday Yom Kippur. Rabbi Joshua didn't believe them. He felt that the next day, let's say Friday or whatever it would be Rosh Hashanah, it would be Yom Kippur. Thereupon Rabbi Gamliel said to him, I enjoin you, I command you, to appear before me with your staff and your money. Right? I mean, travel, carry your money on the day which, according to you, should be the day of atonement. Rabbi Akiva went to Rabbi Joshua, found him in great distress. He said to him, so again, Rabbi Joshua was now commanded by the head of the court to go against his personal belief that the court made a mistake. Rabbi Joshua felt the court made a mistake. Rabbi Gamliel, the head of the court, turned to him and said, no, you got to do it. And what is a man to do? So Rabbi Akiva went and he was in great distress. So Rabbi Akiva wanted to convince him to do the right thing. I can bring proof from the scripture that whatever Rabbi Gamliel has done is valid. Rabbi Joshua and Rabbi Dosa ben Hurkana said to him, if we call into question the decisions of this Bet Din, in this court of Rabbi Gamliel, we must call in question the decision of every Bet Din that has existed since the days of Moses up to the present time. Rabbi Joshua thereupon took his staff and money, went to Yavne to where Rabbi Gamliel was, and on the day when he felt it was Yom Kippur, meaning he went against his personal belief, violated Yom Kippur, which was Yom Kippur in his mind, because again, according to the courts, it wasn't Yom Kippur. Rabbi Gamliel rose and kissed him on his head and said, "Come in peace, my teacher and my disciple. My teacher in wisdom and my disciple, because you have accepted my decision." So the story ends on a nice note, sort of. That Rabbi Gamliel, says, you're smarter than me, but you have to listen to me. But here we have, this is the paradigm of a person, Yom Kippur, the holiest day of the Jewish year, and a person which was commanded by the supreme authority to act and violate what he considers Yom Kippur for the good of all the decisions that ever existed from Moses until this time, which is we're talking about a period of 1,300 years, 1,400 years. That's an unbelievable concept. So it seemingly, if you would stop here, it would sound like this: whatever the authority is, whatever the laws are, you got to follow. No questions. If they say right, if they say left, you got to do what you got to do. I'm going to skip source, not numbered source, the second one on page 2. Go to the one on the bottom. There's another story. Akavia, the son of Mahalel. Right, he was a rabbi, and he testified about 4 things. Irrelevant what they were. That means he got up and he had 4 major arguments with the Supreme Court. They said to him, Akavia, retract the 4 things that you have said, and we will make you the head of the courts. Right? He said to them, better I be called a fool all my days. So long as I do not do wickedness for even a single moment before the omnipresent in God. So they will not say he retracted because he wanted power. They excommunicated him. And he died in excommunication, and the court stoned his coffin. Right? No. Said Rabbi Yehuda, God forbid what to say that Akavia was excommunicated because he was smarter than all the men of Israel. Rather, it was someone else, Elazar ben Chanoch. But the second part, if you look at page 3, the second part of the story, the next Mishnah. In the hour of his death, he turns to his son.
So where are you now?
At the top of page 3, where the little number 7 in the bracket. In the hour of Akavia's death, he said to his son, my son, retract the 4 things that I used to say. So here we have a monkey. What's going on? Akavia, again, according to some opinions, died at excommunication. According to other sources, didn't die. But his whole life, he was stubborn, obstinate. He was excommunicated because he felt he was right, and you got to listen. So why is he telling his sons to repent? And if his sons should change their minds, then why did he change his mind? His son said to him, and why did you not retract these statements? He said to them, I heard them from the mouths of many people. And they, the other sages, heard them from the mouths of many people. I mean, we both had a tradition. I knew I was right, they knew they were right. I stood by what I heard, and they stood by what they heard. But now, you, my sons, only heard these things from the mouths of a single person, me. And the opposite, meaning the other people, from the mouths of many people. It is better to leave the words of a single person and grab hold of the words of the many. So here we have a very interesting, so here's the first, before we get to the last source, here's the first question. Here you have Akavia who disagrees to the point that his whole life he puts up a fight. And he will not accept the authority of the main court. And he's okay with that. Even to the point of excommunicated. He won't change his mind because God doesn't want me to change my mind. Really? Akavia, you got it wrong. We learned in our first few sources that you're supposed to listen to the Supreme Court, whether they say right or left. If they say right is left, left is right, day is night, night is day, you got to listen. So why did you stay with your opinion? On the other hand, and if you really felt you're right, that you were supposed to be obstinate, then your kid should follow in your way. And if your kid shouldn't follow in your way, then you should have changed your mind. So here we have that it's not so simple. It is not so simple that we automatically have to follow and listen, even if Supreme Court makes a decision. Okay? So here is the beginning of the question. And in classic Talmudic sense, we have a source of the Talmud which will destroy everything we've learned until now. And that is the real question. That's the last source. So up until now, that's why, just building suspense, we have all the sources, the source of the Bible, this Talmud, the first Talmud, the story about Rabbi Gamliel Rav Yeshua, this about Kavya, that you got to listen. Whether you think it's right or wrong, you got to listen. Okay. Now we have a Mishnah from the book called Horiot, which teaches an interesting thing. If the court ruled that any of the ritual commandments mentioned in the Torah may be transgressed, so let us say, for some reason, the court got together, the Supreme Court got together and said, here they're talking about forbidden fats, but we'll make it a little bit more, forbidden fats, right? The Jews don't eat from the second half of an animal, the hindquarters, because an Orthodox Jew will not eat a filet mignon. Even from a kosher cow slaughtered properly, a filet mignon, which comes from the hindquarters, because of the commandment not to eat from the sciatic nerve, from the story of our patriarch Yaakov, Jacob, fighting with the angel, Jews have not eaten from the hindquarters. So no T-bone steak, no filet mignon. If the court got up and said, in our opinion, today's day, it doesn't apply anymore, everyone can have a T-bone steak. Everyone can have a filet mignon. Okay, sounds good. And if you went ahead that day, you heard the court ruling, and you went got yourself a T-bone steak, right? You are innocent. It's not your fault. You followed the ruling of the court. He is exempt because he relied on the ruling of the court. And now here is the surprising twist to everything we're doing today. If, however, when the court issued an erroneous ruling, one of them, who knew that they had erred, or a disciple who was himself capable of deciding matters of law, proceeded and acted in accordance with their ruling, he is liable, since he wasn't dependent on the court. Someone who knew better and knew they made a mistake, and he said, great, I know they're wrong, but I just got license to go get my filet mignon. Perfect. He's guilty. He's guilty. You're not allowed to listen. You can't follow. You have to disagree. And you have to be a conscientious objector. And if you went ahead and ate, you're guilty. This is against everything we learned. It's against everything we learned. We learn, and now, the Talmud, if you take a look at the Talmud, like whom, for instance? Rabbi applied, for instance, like Simon ben Azai and Simon ben Zoma. And then in the bottom, I just, if you want a little background or biographical information, in the small letters from the Wikipedia pages, Shimon ben Zoma and Shimon ben Azai were not called rabbis, as you noticed. Rabbis was a term, you had to be part of the court, you had to be, move up in rank. And if you were someone who sat in the courts and you observed, and you were considered a wise scholar, we'd call it, if you were a clerk, you could be the best clerk ever, you're still not a judge. Right? I think that's a nice way of saying it. So Shimon ben Az, Shimon ben Zoma were unbelievable scholars. They knew everything. But because, and again, this is, if you take a look here at the bottom, his name is used without the title rabbi. He died at a young age, never receiving smicha. So you had to get into, you had to be anointed a rabbi, or appointed a rabbi. So these were the top guys. They knew everything. If those guys, if those rabbis, it's funny, you can't call the rabbis obviously, but the tradition is you don't call them rabbis, you call them Ben Azai or Ben Zoma because they never achieved the title. But they knew everything. They would listen and hear the court make this erroneous ruling, and they would eat, they'd be guilty. And what would their mistake be? They erred, the last line, they erred in the interpretation of the precept of obeying the words of the sages. They thought they had a commandment to listen and be good boys, right? They had to be good boys, and they made a mistake. You don't have to be a good boy. If you hold your right, you're right. And I don't care about the Supreme Court, I don't care about the ruling, I'm right. So every medieval commentator, when they got to this piece of Talmud, was bothered. You have a contradiction, an unbelievable contradiction. On one hand, you gotta listen, you gotta follow. On the other hand, if you know they're wrong, do not follow, and if you follow, you're guilty. Anyone want to be a medieval commentator and try to explain these two Talmudic sources that are they disagree? And I'm willing to take any medieval scholars who have an opinion. No? No one?
So basically, if they tell you can do it and you do it, you're okay with it. And if they
tell me and you, because we're not really great scholars, if they tell me and you to do it and we do it, no problem. Not our fault. We listened.
Even though you know it's wrong.
But me and you don't really know because we're not real great scholars.
So you can apply that also to the second case.
But the really great scholars, and if they know they're wrong, can't listen. So, you know, again, it's not a great parallel to what we're experiencing today. Yes?
The problem I have with the construct that you set up
Right.
is your use of the word wrong.
Okay, I was waiting for that.
I mean,
Correct.
that's really the concept here. If you say, oh, I think it's okay to murder someone,
Right.
you say it's not, well, I'm going to follow, I mean, there's a wrong and a wrong.
So, you know,
If I can say that Rosh Hashanah is this day and not tomorrow, it's not really wrong, it's a difference of opinion about a matter that's important to the tradition. I'm not sure that you can use the same word wrong.
correct. So, you know, that is obviously a very, the assumption of all the text and of all what we're speaking about is exactly the opposite of what you said, if I may. The assumption of everything we're assuming is that there is an absolute right and wrong, that there are absolutes,
And there's some
and just as important, and just like killing is wrong, eating a filet mignon is wrong.
different kind of wrong, but it's wrong.
Right, and that's why we had. If you went back to you know, even the first source, if it's homicide, civil law, assault, all matters that you go to court, no matter what the issue is, if it's an issue that you need a decision about, and there's an absolute. You could ask the other question, and you know, without getting into historical questions, that before we read the last source on page 2, we all know that Judaism from the beginning had breakoffs, had schisms, had groups that broke off and that argued. You know, the most obvious one, let's just pick the Sadducees. Right? The Sadducees in the end of the Second Temple disagreed about many matters of law, and they didn't accept the authority to be, and then they became a splinter group. Whether they still exist or don't exist, you know, is irrelevant. You know, whether the later groups, whether the Karaites were a later interpretation or of the Sadducees. But that's the question that, you know, evolved. So I'm still looking for a medieval scholar to offer an opinion. And I'll reiterate the question. The question is, we have most of the sources seem to indicate that, especially, you know, the first source on the first page, that you have to listen to the supreme authority whether it's right or wrong. And as Professor Raphael pointed out, there is no right or wrong, but whatever they decide is right and wrong. Yet we have the last source we did implied that if you know what's right or wrong, you may not listen to the Supreme Court, which decided the opposite of what's right and wrong. And the thought question, which again, the parallel that I want to bring to today's, if we can, is that what if, you know, you hit a point when, right, the president-elect was elected by law. That is the law, and you follow the law. But there are many people who feel that who knows what's going to be, or maybe already, or maybe in the future, there will be things that are said that are totally wrong, right? Wrong for many reasons. So what do you do then? On one hand, you follow, if you're a law-abiding citizen, you follow the law. But what happens if the law is wrong? And what if you know better? So it's a tension that anytime you have laws in a society, and you know, as we remember from, you know, Kristallnacht was, not to compare, but Kristallnacht was a few years ago, and we watched that video of Professor Reicher, as he mentioned the point that all of the laws of Germany were laws. Right? You can get laws passed and them to be totally wrong. So what do you do when you know it's wrong, but it's a law? Now, obviously, that's not the same case here. So, anyone? No?
Civil disobedience?
Yeah, so, you know, that's the question. So, but that's in our case. So here, so the Ramban, Nachmanides, said that everyone is allowed to have their. He basically said everyone's allowed to have their opinions and follow it if they're worthy, but they have an obligation to go speak to the court. You have an obligation to present, And once you present, and then they say no, you have to listen. So he
What
answers.
are you reading now?
Now I would just tell you by heart because I couldn't find that in English, so I didn't put it on the source sheet. We're going to read Ramban on page 2 in a second. Let's read it now. So let's look on page 2. The Ramban. Ramban is Nachmanides. Nachmanides was a Spanish rabbi of the 14th century, who, in the irony of this, in talking about it today, he was put up. The king made him dispute a Jewish convert to Christianity, and it's a famous dispute in Barcelona in the 1300s. And Nachmanides lost. I don't know if it was a fair trial, but he lost. And he was exiled, and he was exiled to Israel. He had to leave Spain. So you see that sometimes you could have a debate, which you might sort of, where the king of Spain is sitting on, and he's the judge. It's not always the fairest of fights. But his interpretation to Deuteronomy. So again, the verse of Deuteronomy that we read before, 17:11 on page 1 was, "You shall act in accordance with the instructions given to you, whether right or left." And the rabbinic interpretation of that is, here we are on top here on page 2, even if he tells you about that, the right that is left or the left that is right. That is the language of Rashi. And its matter is that even if you think in your heart that they are erring, and this thing is simple in your eyes, and just like you know the difference between the right and your left, do like they command. Do not say, how can I eat this completely forbidden fat? Or how can I kill this innocent man? Again, if the court decides capital punishment for someone. But rather say, so did the master commands command me to do with commandments, that I should do his commandments according to all those who stood in front of him. In the place that he shall choose, instruct me, and he gave me the Torah upon understanding of their minds, even if they err. And this is the matter of Rabbi Shua and Rabbi Gamliel about Yom Kippur that fell out according to the calculation. So here we have a very, Nachmanides interjects or brings in theology into law. He says, and I'm going to continue reading, and the need for this commandment is very great, since the Torah is given to us in writing, and it is known that the opinions are not all the same concerning all of its implications. And otherwise disagreement would grow and the Torah becomes several Torahs. So here he makes the point that, as we know, the Bible is very vague, ambiguous, right? And we could argue about it all day. And just to give it right, the Bible says, the Torah says, keep the Shabbos, the Sabbath. Nowhere, as Professor Raphael will tell me a lot of times, nowhere does it say anything about driving a car, because it can't. And it won't say anything about turning a light. And it won't say anything about cooking. It doesn't say anything. It just very vague, ambiguous terms. With many things it's like that. The actual Torah can be read in so many ways. So there's tradition, there is opinion, there's interpretations. But if you take just the book itself, the good book itself, right? It doesn't say a lot. It says a lot, but it doesn't give you unbelievable detail. So what would happen naturally is that we'd have 5 people in a room and 6 opinions, how to interpret it. And then it would turn out that we would all be separate and not cohesive. And what do? So you have to have an authority. But now what Nachmanides does is he says not only is there an authority, but God's will is to listen to the authority, and that is as if it was given. It's an unbelievable thing. That means he has invested in the court or in the deciding that they are a continuation of the Torah itself, of the giving of the Torah itself, of the Bible itself, which is an unbelievable statement. Because the Torah was given to us in conjunction with the opinions and positions of the future sages and deciders, even if in your eyes like the replacing of the right and the left, all the more so if it's the right, it's the left, tell you the right is right, the left is left. So here you have, in a way, Nachmanides trying to bridge the gap. And then on one hand, there is no absolute right or wrong. If the court decides it, it's right, or the court decides it's wrong. But on the other hand, if you know the interpretation, you have a tradition of the words are a certain way, then you can't deviate from it. So I'm still leaving with the question. But what I try to do is, in a way, disassociate the parallels that I started with, and that is the assumption of all of the questions of right and left and listening and not listening are a question of how much do you believe the interpreters and the decisions are godly? And how much do you believe that they have the right to decide right and wrong all the way back, and that is what God wanted? Throughout the ages and all the history of the Jewish people, from the beginning until all the schisms and all the breakups, really centered around this question. And that is the question that in a way breaks up societies and turns, people who have might have the same text to begin with, but they end up breaking apart or distancing themselves from one or the other over the question of who gets to interpret and who gets to decide what's right and wrong. And it's not an easy question. And the Talmud in a way doesn't help, because when you have two opposite sources saying the same thing, you sort of have to figure it out yourself. But that's what I just wanted to share with you today, that this problem, of dealing with authority, this problem dealing with the laws that are lawful but might be wrong or might be disagreeing with you, is not a new problem. It's a very ancient problem, and it goes back to the question of authority. Where does it get from, and how much authority does those who have authority claim to get it from? Any questions, answers, opinions? Yeah.
Was there any historical event that was the catalyst for this change in direction here, from listening to authority and then opposing authority when you know it's wrong? Something happened maybe?
That's a great question. Was there a historical event that caused this? My guess is that one of the reasons we have the oral law written down today, and which started at the same time, was because of two things. One was the dispersion, or the Jewish people, the end of the Second Temple, the oppression from the foreign governments, which made it hard for their decentralized body. And as the way Maimonides puts in his book, is that the more we were oppressed and the more that there was, people were running for their lives and etc., there was less time to learn and study, be studious. So therefore, arguments happened. I mean, if we would all sit together and quietly think, we'd all get to an opinion. But because there's so much outside pressures, that's when arguments started. So once arguments really started, and it only started, according to tradition, late Second Temple, that is when this question really became a serious question. What do you do with dissenters? And that's why their source had bottom of page 2 of Akavia. He was the paradigm of that. He would never give in, but he still said to his children, there is something called authority, but I don't have to listen to it because I know I'm right, but you do because you don't really know you're right. So then there's you have the father and son, one knows he's right, one doesn't know he's right. So it's,
It's interesting that he went out of his way to have his sons atone for his sin, quote unquote.
Correct.
The sons are guilty of nothing.
Correct. And imagine,
it's interesting for him to think, I want my sons to make this right because of me, or
and it's
because I don't want them to have to say, "Oh, you're a Kavi sons, you must be bad guys."
Well, so I would say the other way, with filial, loyalty. If they said, "We are our father's tradition, we're sticking to it. My father's, has been a Kavi." No, that's what
accepted the challenge.
I don't know, but I can imagine that's the difficulty they're facing, is their father was known as he's the outlier his whole life. He's the and are you following your father's way? So either way you're messed over. And if you don't follow your father, how could you? If you don't follow the courts, how could you?
It's interesting that he didn't say, if you choose to follow
Correct.
my way.
He told them that by law you'd have to disagree with your father.
Right.
Correct. That's very interesting.
Very interesting.
Yeah. Okay.
I guess he knew he was dying.
So you have to figure out here whether you're a great scholar in which you can override the courts.
Correct. Yes.
You're a great scholar.
Correct.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Put it in the invitation.
Yeah, although you're an outlier too.
In Breshit, Abraham.
He was the first outlier.
He challenged
That's correct.
about 10 innocent people.
That's whatever. Yeah, that he was the first outlier, Abraham. But that's the question. If you're someone who can argue, you have to argue. If not, you have to listen. Now you have to decide who's going to decide which person are you.
We have no basis for making a decision here.
That's right. Okay.
So
Thank you.
Taught us nothing.
I've taught you that. If anything I taught you today, it's absolutely nothing.
And it's okay, as long as I know that you taught us nothing.
Yeah, it's just as an observer of current events like yourself, these questions bother me, and I as the rabbi here, I try to revert to the sources, see what the sources can teach me, and in this case, it's only a good medieval scholar like yourself could figure out how to bridge these two sources and figure out what is the in between the raindrops between the sources.
Let's ask the students.
Let's ask the students.
if A, the speech from the stage in Hamilton was acceptable, and B, the booing of the vice president-elect was acceptable.
I'll go first.
Okay.
Please.
So I think the speech was acceptable. I think that given the historical, so Hamilton talks about the creating of this nation.
Yes.
How it came from, all these people from different walks of life. And I think the message all throughout.
Do you know what we're speaking
Yes, I do.
Or
Yes.
is your head in the clouds and you?
Please, please.
I think given their platform, I think it was an acceptable speech, and I don't think that they were offensive in any way.
I agree. I think the speech was not only acceptable, but it was terrific.
It was terrific. I think the book was unacceptable, because ultimately that is our vice president-elect. And I
I
say
agree.
this, and I say this because ultimately, as much as I may not like him, as much as I think that his beliefs are deplorable to a degree, that is what the American people have chosen.
Yeah.
We have a democratic system,
Right.
so ultimately, if this is what was given to us, you have to, when life gives you lemons, you make lemonade. So
Unless you're a scholar, in which case you can right,
you
You could rightfully disagree.
disagree and publicly.
You can. And
You can't make lemonades out of
If
everything.
you disagree with Pence, if you disagree with him, fine. Make your disagreements known in a platform that makes sense. Don't boo him because that only feeds the fire of people that already
that's certainly
support
true.
him.
The respect is important, I think.
Respect is important because he's not going to value what you say if you're not coming
I think
from a
that's right.
position of respect and understanding. Even if he may not be giving it to you, it's who you are in that argument that defines better your point.
I think, don't you think that the booing was,
Childish?
well, yeah. I mean, I think people who were there all of a sudden realized Pence was there, he was leaving, and people booed. It wasn't preordained or, pre-calculated. I think just people.
But that makes it worse in a way. That the knee-jerk reaction is that to boo the vice president-elect.
Give the guy the dignity of his station in life. And secondly, he hasn't screwed up yet.
Nothing's happened yet.
Let's see where he goes.
Governor.
Yeah, so,
When I heard the speech, it was interesting to me.
and of course, Lin-Manuel Miranda wrote the speech, which is why it was such a brilliant speech.
Oh, he wrote it for. Oh, that part I know.
He knew Pence was coming, and he wrote the speech.
Even though he's no longer in the show.
It's his show, and he's brilliant, and so people said, what would you like to say?
So the question I have, and it just touches on your last point, is they haven't really done anything yet. Now, all signs point towards the negative.
Yeah,
or
I think Trump is different than Pence.
Penn, in why Trump has done anything, or
Pence,
Well,
Pence has been a governor.
he stoked the fire.
He stoked the fires.
Pence.
But so the question is, how do you make a speech that we're all afraid? I get
It wasn't. That's exactly what was the speech I think was good. It wasn't, you're a terrible person, we're all afraid of you.
Right,
It
it's-
was, here's your nation that you're about to govern.
right,
Black and white,
right.
man and female, I thought it was brilliant. But I was surprised about the booing.
Yeah, me too.
It seemed childish. Thank you.
Thank you all. Have a great day.